Welcome to Behind Beliefs and Behaviors, where we take you on a journey each week to discovering the root of beliefs and behaviors that stand in the way of everything from health, wealth, and relationships to leadership, community transformation, and societal progress. From topics on leadership, psychological safety, corporate culture, and communication to parenting, trauma, relationships, personal health, and intimacy, every week we take you to the source and provide practical tips to transform your life one root cause at a time. I am your host, Dr. Maiysha. Now let's get to work. Welcome to Behind Beliefs Behavior, Getting to the Root Cause with Dr. Maiysha. While I am not new to podcasting, I decided to start this new podcast because much of what I do, much of what I talk about is getting to the root cause. And so I wanted to start this podcast as a foundation for the conversations that I often have in the big rooms of organizations and on stages about the little things that we don't think about getting to the root of. And so what you can expect is that not only will I be continuing to do solo podcasts, for those of you who know me from the Black Mind Garden, I did solo podcasts alternating with guest podcasts. So not only will I continue to do that, and I will run a very similar format to this show, but I will be beginning to expand my topics and really talk more about the root cause of many of the things that we don't often think about, and particularly around our thinking and our communication. And so I'll pause here just for those who may be new to me, many of you may not be new to me, but I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Maiysha Clairborne. I am a family integrative medicine physician by training, and I actually ran a private practice for 10 years and practiced clinical medicine for about 15 years before I made my transition. And inside of that transition, I began coaching physicians and healthcare professionals who were burned out in their careers. And that led me to doing executive coaching, career transition coaching. But along the way, I really got clear that the biggest difference that I could make is not only in coaching, but also in teaching and training and consulting. So just to back up a little bit, I am a master practitioner and master trainer of neuro-linguistic programming. And what that means is that I delve into the intricacies of language and communication and how it affects the brain. My background is in psychology. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology. And so I have always been fascinated with the brain and human behavior and why we do the things that we do. And I think that particularly led me on the path to obtaining this additional education, this additional expertise in neurolinguistic programming. And so combined my psychology degree combined with the master trainer in NLP and neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis, and it gives me a very deep knowledge and foundational background of how our language affects our behavior, how our thinking, how our brain really is at the source of much of what we do. So the title of this podcast is Behind Our Beliefs and Behaviors is Our Brain. And it's really very, very true, because when we're born as babies, we are blank slates. Now, are there generational inherited potentials that come in? Absolutely. Absolutely. The research has shown that there are epigenetic changes that can happen that can predispose certain populations, particularly marginalized populations, toward particular things, right? Well, and I'm keeping it global on purpose because we will have many of these conversations more specifically during the podcast. And we are born as babies with these sort of blank slates. And it is the environment and it is the values and beliefs that we begin to inherit. These things are modeled. This is information that we're taking in. So as babies, we're sponges. That first 10 years of life, we are sponges. We're taking in a lot of information. And even as adults, and if you've listened to my TEDx talk, you've heard me say this 1,000 times, that we have 11 million bits of information per second coming into our nervous system. Imagine you're a baby and you're a baby, you're an infant, you're a child, you're in the pinnacle of this growth and development. These various stages are coming and going like very, very quickly. And you're just absorbing all of this information to know like what to believe, to know how to respond, to know all of these things. And so our brain is literally behind our beliefs, and our beliefs and our listening, it drives our behavior. And so why is that important? It's important because it really gives us an opportunity when we really begin to understand how powerful our brains are, how powerful our minds are, how powerful our beliefs are. It really begins to put us at the source and have us not only be responsible, but accountable to our behaviors. And this is the work that I am committed to doing. And so this is why I work in organizations inside of the anti-oppression space, the equity and inclusion and belonging space. This is why I focus so much on centering psychological and emotional safety in organizations. This is why I talk so much. If you know me, if you follow me, you know I love to talk about this work in the context of parenting, in the context of leadership, because as chronological adults, we have not only an opportunity, but a responsibility to begin to re-examine our own beliefs and where they come from and how it has impacted the behavior and the communication with others today. How it is impacting our leadership, how it is impacting how we run our businesses, how we run our teams, and how we run our organizations, and how it impacts the biases that we may have. When we can become responsible for that, then we can begin to interrupt those harmful and unuseful thoughts that come out in our communication and our behavior. Because listen, our communication is basically our thoughts put on loudspeaker, our beliefs and our values put on loudspeaker. And so if you're the kind of person who is like, well, I don't want to change my beliefs or my values, this may be not the podcast for you. And I'll just say that up front. I know that my topics are not for everyone, but for those people who are committed to shifting to something bigger than themselves, to shifting the status quo of where our society is going, and who are committed to their own personal growth and expansion, and not just for self, but for the expansion of the people around you, for your children, for your spouse, for your friends, parents, siblings, for your teams, for your leaders, then you're going to want to listen to this podcast, because we have some amazing conversations lined up with some amazing people. And I will be each week bringing topics of my own, thoughts and musings of my own, and leaving you with some clear steps and tips of things to go out and practice in the world. So one of the things that people know about me is I'm the kind of person who care about the insight, but I'm more committed to the application. All right. So I will typically never tell an empty story or never tell a pointless story or a pointless metaphor. And I will always leave you with action items to go and do and practice in the world. And the reason for that is because I am very committed to bringing value. When I step on anybody's stage in anybody's organization or anybody's conference, my largest commitment is that you walk away with something immediately after I leave the stage or you leave the room that you can apply, it's something that you're thinking about, that you can apply to your thinking, that you can apply to your conversations. One of the things that I have noticed as I have consulted and worked with large organizations, academic institutions, is that there's a lot of teaching about a subject, about a concept, about the research, but there's not always the bridge of how to get from the insight to the day-to-day application and action. What are the steps in between? And that is where progress gets lost. Progress gets lost in the steps between knowing about or understanding something and actually putting it into practice. And so that is the space that I occupy. That is the expertise that I occupy. And so as we move into this series of podcasts, this season 1 of Behind Beliefs and Behaviors, I want you to consider that behind all of your beliefs and your behaviors is your brain. Now, that does not negate the real things that are going on in our world and our society, right? The things that we see with our eyes, the things that we hear with our ears, the things that we experience and we feel with our bodies. It doesn't negate or invalidate those experiences. And I think that's important to say. What it does, though, is it allows us to expand the flexibility of our response, right? When we can look at, okay, here's the experience that's happening here. Here is what I see out there in the world. What do I believe and what could I believe, right? What do I believe is happening and what could I believe is possible? Or what do I believe is possible and what could I believe is possible, both for the world and what I'm capable of, right? What do I believe I'm capable of impacting in the world? And what could I believe that I'm capable of impacting the world? Give you an example. There are a lot of people that I've seen on social media that come up in my feed that feel like certain things that are going on in the world are not their fight. That's what they believe, right? And there's nothing wrong with that particular belief. It could be harmful, but when we think of things in the binary, right or wrong, then it actually puts us at a disadvantaged thinking space, right? And I've talked about the nature of binary thinking. The nature of binary thinking is harmful. It's harmful to ourselves and it's harmful to others and it's very limiting. But there are people who believe that. Now, the problem with that is that that person could be making an impact, but they believe that maybe it's not their cross to bear because they can't make an impact. Sometimes it's not their cross to bear just because of sheer exhaustion. And that's a whole other podcast as well. When you have people who are historically harmed or marginalized and taking on a lot of trauma and expected to take on that trauma, sometimes the boundary has to be set. So one of the things that I like to talk about is how two things can be true. There can be dialectics involved, right? However, we have to examine, where does the belief come from? It doesn't mean the belief is wrong, but one could say, well, why specifically is it not my cross to bear, not my fight to fight? Could there be a way that I could impact it and it still feel workable? Could there be a way that I can make an impact without it being consumed? So there are questions that can be asked to determine. And if the answer at the end of the day is no, then the answer is no. But the point is, if we look at the things that we believe, the immediate things that come up that we believe, and we begin to question, well, why do I believe that? Is that a belief that is serving me right now? Is it a belief that's harmful to me or to another? And then what could I believe? You could also ask the question, what prevents me from believing anything different? So there are these just very simple questions to ask to really allow you to pick up a belief like an object and just take a look at it. Just take a look at it like maybe you pick up a pebble or a stone and you're examining that stone. You're looking at all the intricacies, the marks, the grooves of that stone, and looking at it with curiosity. This is the way we can look at our beliefs. And then we can look at what is it in our past? What have we absorbed? What mentally have we absorbed? What cognitive shortcuts have we taken to believe that thing? So, coming back to the brain, because typically our beliefs are a product of our cognitive shortcuts. And if we look at what are the cognitive shortcuts that we're taking, what are the ways that we are generalizing, distorting, or deleting information that causes the beliefs to be what they are, and then ask whether we're being served by those, then that's when we can then begin to look at, what could be different? What am I missing in the story? And I often utilize the 3 positions of listening in my trainings to illustrate this. Position number 1, position number 2, and position number 3. Position number 1 being looking through your own eyes. Position number 2, looking through the eyes of another. And position number 3 being the observer as a fly on the wall. And so if you haven't heard me do that, you can actually listen to my TEDx talk. I actually walk you through that exercise. And probably at some point again in one of these episodes, you'll get to experience it as well. You will notice that the format again will be similar to the Black Mind Garden. You may notice that some of the topics may be similar, but we will be expanding, because for me, at this point, I really am committed to getting to the root cause of what is behind the unresourceful, the unuseful, the beliefs and behaviors that are not serving us. And what is behind the beliefs and the behaviors that are serving us? What is it that is at the source of success, of commitment, of discipline? What is the source of integrity? What is the source of people who can be honest and transparent? The source of people who can set boundaries? So not just the source of things that don't serve us, but what is at the source of things that do? And we can begin to ask ourselves those questions, because even as we talk about what's behind the unresourceful beliefs and behaviors, when we look at what is behind the beliefs and behaviors that are working, then we can begin to duplicate those processes and model those processes so that we actually expand and create even bigger positive results in our lives and the lives of others. And so with that, I invite you to go ahead and subscribe to this podcast. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, I'm a listener to the Black Mind Garden. What is going to happen to that podcast? Well, we are sunsetting the Black Mind Garden. I have thoroughly enjoyed having the podcast, the Black Mind Garden. And the reason that we're sunsetting that podcast is because when I started that podcast 4 years ago, I started it with a very particular audience in mind and a very particular intention. And that intention has been fulfilled. And I'm very much a proponent of when an intention has been fulfilled, when something is complete, it is okay to shift and pivot and change. It is okay to close the chapter of the book. So that intention of that podcast has been fulfilled. It is time to close that book. The podcast will remain on the podcast platforms. So if there are guests that you loved, if there were episodes that you loved, then you can still go back and re-listen to the entire 4 seasons of the Black Mind Garden. And moving forward, this will be the primary podcast that I will be adding to. And so I invite you to subscribe so that you will know when new episodes are dropping and releasing. And I am committed to really making a difference with this podcast. And you might not know this, but this podcast is releasing the week of my 49th birthday. And so I'm asking and inviting you to share this podcast with as many people as possible. I would love for this month, the month of April, to be the month where I have 1,000 downloads to this podcast. And so will you help me? Will you help me to gain that first 1,000 downloads by sharing this podcast with at least 3 people? 3 people. Everyone shared this podcast with 3 people. It would catapult the impact of this podcast tenfold. So that is my ask for you. I told you I would give you homework. This is actually bonus homework. The first is be examining those beliefs and look at the relationship of those beliefs to your interactions with others and look at what is possible. How can you shift? What would be possible if you believed something different? What kind of communication, what kind of interaction would be possible if you believed something different? Are you willing to examine that? And then the second is share this episode, share this podcast, encourage those people to subscribe as well. Help me get my first 1,000 downloads. It would be an honor in my birthday month if this were made possible. So with that said, I look forward to seeing you on future episodes of Behind Beliefs and Behaviors. We have an amazing season 1 coming up, and I have some special surprises coming up in the fall as well. Some special episodes, some special guests. So you all have an amazing rest of the day, an amazing rest of the week. And as always, stay empowered. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We know that without the listeners, there is no podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe so you do not miss when we drop our next episode, and share this podcast with a friend, a family member, and a colleague, at least one person in your life today. This episode was brought to you by the Mind Remapping Company, helping organizations create psychologically and emotionally safe cultures that make their employees and leaders feel seen, heard, respected, welcome, and valued, all while fostering a thriving, engaged, and healthy workforce for the organization. Is your organization in need of a speaker? I speak about topics like psychological and emotional safety, trauma-informed communication, and employee well-being. If this is aligned with your organizational inclusion, belonging, or leadership goals, contact me, Dr. Maiysha, by going to www.mindremappingacademy.com. That's mindremappingacademy.com. Finally, we train leaders, but we also train coaches. If you're interested in becoming a trauma-informed coach, visit our website as well and check out our NLP coach trainings and certifications. We'll see you on the next episode. Until then, stay empowered.